As you may already be aware, Nigeria will be hosting the 4th International Conference on Safe Schools Declaration, which will take place this October from the 25th to the 27th. Clearly, the unwarranted attacks on schools across the world have made gatherings such as this absolutely imperative in order to fashion ways to better protect students, teachers, educators, as well as the infrastructure and facilities for providing education. I must commend the drivers of the International Conference on Safe Schools Declaration, the Global Coalition to Protect Education from Attack, GCPEA, commend them for working tirelessly to ensure our schools remain safe havens for students, teachers, and educators. I also must appreciate the enthusiasm and commitment shown by our partners and co-hosts, in particular the governments of Spain, Argentina, and Norway. They have demonstrated exceptional interest in capacity building and also sustaining the momentum of the Safe Schools Declaration globally. We'll hear from the representatives of each of those countries in the course of this briefing. For your information, Spain was the host of the 3rd International Conference on Safe Schools Declaration. And so we look forward to Ambassador Ansorena's reflections today on the key outcomes of the Palma Conference. And his reflections will guide us as we prepare for the Abuja Conference. The Federal Ministry of Education has spearheaded the implementation of the SSD, the Safe Schools Declaration in Nigeria, and has received all the support they need from the President Buhari-led government, as is evident in the fact that Nigeria is the first country on the African continent to host this conference. I'd also like to state that we understand the challenges our educational system is currently facing, occasioned by insecurity and banditry. But nevertheless, we want to assure you that the government is doing everything possible to ensure that our children can return to their schools without fear of being attacked. I want to especially recognize the very huge and important role of UNICEF, the United Nations International Children's Emergency Fund, the very important role that they have been playing to make this pre-conference briefing a reality. And we appreciate the positive impact that their support on education, not just in Nigeria, but globally, has really been.
We already had a strong engagement for education and emphasized the invaluable role of educational institutions and individuals and communities for development and for protecting children from harm. We were strengthening our partnership with other states and organizations like UNICEF and Save the Children, and increased our financial and political support for education, including in conflicts. At the same time, we and others had been watching a dramatic increase in attacks on schools in conflict. We were discussing how to address this through multilateral channels, but we met a lot of resistance. People affected by conflict constantly identify safe access to education for their children as a priority. There was a growing recognition that protecting these institutions are essential to achieving peace and security. Civil society and some international organizations like UNICEF and UNESCO had rung the alarm bells already. And through the Global Coalition to Protect Education from Attack, they came together to find practical ways to strengthen the protection of education. They had identified the military use of schools as a particular problem and developed a set of recommendations known as the guidelines. The NGO community in Geneva and other places then approached us to seek support for their guidelines. Norway and Argentina in the first place thought this practical approach was a very good way forward. We decided to develop a political declaration between states with a broader commitment to protect education from attack, including the use of the guidelines to prevent military use of schools. And very shortly after, we had a fantastic cross-regional core group with Spain, Nigeria, and a few others took part, and we started consultations among states in Geneva on this political declaration. One of the first discussions we had in this group was whether to choose a strong and ambitious text or to seek a broad consensus over a softer text. We chose the first path, despite warnings and a lot of skepticism from many. We did this because we think and we thought an ambitious declaration would have a stronger impact for the actual protection of schools. In 2015 then, we all came together in Oslo to launch the declaration, and by then it was 37 states in the beginning. Seeing where we are today, I think it's fair to say that the need for the declaration and for the guidelines is bigger than ever. It's easy to become pessimistic when we see the developments where schools are still targets and where they still are being used for military purpose. At the same time, we now have a strong and effective tool in our protection toolbox. 109 countries have endorsed the Safe School Declaration by now. That is more than half of the UN members, and 10 out of 15 countries currently serving on the UN Security Council have adopted it. But even more important, the declaration has become universally accepted, including amongst those who haven't adopted it or endorsed it, and is today being used as a reference in Security Council resolutions, discussions at the Human Rights Council, and many other places where protection is being discussed. I would like to say again that we are really proud to be co-hosts yet again of the Safe Schools Declaration conferences and this upcoming Abuja conference. We look forward to work very closely with you and with the Ministry of Education and to support you, to continue to support you in any way that we can.
We invited Ministries of Defense, Education, Justice and Foreign Affairs to work together in protecting from attacks. We will continue these training efforts and I hope that also the Abuja conference in October will be a further step in the training programs. Seventh point, the universalization. I think that my colleagues have already highlighted the importance. The universalization of the objectives remains fundamental, and we need to strive to make further progress in this direction. And I think the Abuja conference will be a beacon for nations to come together. This comes at a time where here in Nigeria we see that education is being under threat, and I want to recall now the tragedy that more than 1,000 children have suffered since the beginning of the year in the north. The kidnapping of all these boys and girls is regrettable and, as President Buhari has said, unacceptable. We want to ensure an early release, and we are all in solidarity with the victims and the families.
Over 22,000 students, teachers, and education personnel were also deliberately targeted. Furthermore, our research highlighted 7,300 cases in which schools were bombed, set on fire, raided, or looted. Beyond immediate injury, death, and destruction, these attacks have devastating consequences. Destroyed educational facilities take significant resources to rebuild. Threatened teachers flee, meaning that students have no lessons to go to even if their schools remain. Thinking long term, we do have generational gaps in education which negatively impact stability, prospects for peace and economic development. During this current pandemic, attacks on education are on the rise. In fact, this pandemic has exposed how vacant schools are being used for military purposes, a concern which was also highlighted in this report by the SRSG latest Children and Armed Conflict report. As you're all aware, 109 countries have now endorsed the Safe Schools Declaration, the majority of UN security member states representing all regions of the world. The declaration is not a legal obligation, but rather a political commitment. By joining the Safe Schools Declaration, countries are committing to better protect education during conflict. By endorsing the Safe Schools Declaration, countries commit to collecting attacks. Countries commit to collecting data on attacks, assisting victims, investigating and prosecuting attacks that violate the law, developing conflict-sensitive approaches to education, working to make sure education continues during war, including by seeking international help, working to support UN efforts, and using the associated guidelines on protecting schools and universities from military use during armed conflict. What are the practical impacts of the Safe Schools Declaration? In the past 6 years, over a dozen countries such as New Zealand, Switzerland, United Kingdom, Denmark, Italy, Philippines, Colombia, Spain, Democratic Republic of Congo, South Sudan, Central African Republic have all revised their national policies and practices, and also their own military manuals to reduce military use of educational facilities. I would like to highlight the case study in CAR, Central African Republic, where last year they criminalized the occupation of schools on the same terms as an attack on a school. In the areas of peacekeeping, the UN Department of Peace Operations have an explicit ban on military use of schools in the UN peacekeeping framework. In January this year, the AU adopted its doctrine on peace support operations, including language regarding using schools for military purposes. The Iraq Education Cluster has created a forum for monitoring and reporting attacks on education and military use of schools.